Revenge porn can cost you 18 years in prison. That's how long 28-year-old Kevin Ballert will be locked up. He created a website where users posted over 10,000 pornographic images of subjects who did not give their consent. Ballert tried to undo some of the damages by offering them $350 to take their photos down, but in the end, he got sentenced to jail for identity theft and extortion, but not for the revenge porn itself. So should it be legally criminalized? And if so, how? Or is it just morally wrong? That's what we'll discuss tonight on Politik Focus. 8 women who are exploited on Ballert's website spoke in court about how the website just ruined their lives. One woman had to drop out of college and go to a mental institution after receiving 400 social media messages regarding pictures posted on the website. So, is revenge porn sexual violence? Is it slander? Is it a criminal offense or is it a civil offense? 17 states have made revenge porn illegal, but some attorneys do argue that if it was a selfie that was uploaded without someone's permission, it's copyright infringement, and that's a civil offense. So, how do we balance the Constitution and our right to free speech with someone else's right to privacy? Here to talk about this is Jared Mayer, the treasurer of Hopkins Students for Liberty. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So, can you tell me a little bit about what your beliefs are about legislating content on the internet in general?
Very simply, I'm extremely skeptical of it, and that's because I believe that regulating content on the internet is something of a Pandora's box that's subject to be, once opened, subject to be exploited by a variety of interests, all with the best intentions, but a variety of interests that may very well want to limit speech beyond, I think, what is appropriate, especially from my libertarian stance. So, while in certain cases it may seem appropriate to do so, I generally approach that those exceptions as exceptions, not as the rule, and also with great hesitation.
So then, how do we deal with these types of exceptional breaches of privacy, where people's personal photos, naked photos, sexual videos are uploaded on the internet? Should it be illegal, and under what pretense?
I think it's one can argue that it should be illegal because you are, especially from a libertarian standpoint, that content, while it may very well have been filmed with the victim's consent at the time of filming, at the time of distribution, that obviously was not. And I think distribution is arguably a part of the process that every member of that content, be it film or be it a photo, must consent to. So I do understand that I am sympathetic to that argument about regulation. In terms of from a legal standpoint, I think it might be it's also quite plausible, considering that the Supreme Court in Miller versus California established for pornography in general this sort of 3-pronged test, but really only like 5 years later, in a case called New York versus Ferber, the court later said, and that was a case of child pornography, the court later said, well, we don't need to even have the 3-pronged test because this is a case of exploitation, where you're basically using, the government has what's called a compelling governmental interest in preventing the exploitation, in that case, of children. I think it's plausible, I think actually highly plausible, to extend that logic to victims in these cases and say, well, they too are being exploited, and thus preventing that exploitation is a compelling governmental interest.
So even these types of pictures generally are, they are legal. You can find plenty of them on the internet. In these cases, the leaks of these photos do lead to things like, sometimes mental distress. Like one of the victims of Ballert's website had to go to a mental institution. People had to drop out of college. They get harassed. So do you think there are other types of charges that could be brought up based on the impacts of these photos?
Sure. I think you can definitely sue somebody under what's known as tort law very broadly. I'm not sure exactly which. I think it would depend on the state in which the person's in, and I think you would have there's certain legal technicalities that I'm honestly not so acquainted with. But overall, you can sue someone for damages in terms of your, I suppose, reputation or mental distress. You can sue someone for damages in those regards. Yeah, I think that's possible. In terms of in terms of other kinds of charges, I think it's difficult to make the argument. For example, it's been proposed sometimes to have violence, sort of mark it as an act of violence, and I think that is sort of an unfair expansion of what the word means. I think the word violence sort of requires an element of tangibility, and although there was damages done to the victim, I don't think any of the victims make so these tangible injury kind of claims that are sort of the hallmark of violence claims in these cases.
So is there anything legally that you think can be justified to prevent these things from popping on the internet in the first place? Because a lot of the types of laws we've been discussing, suing someone for damages, ultimately you can't sue someone for damages until the damage has been done.
Right.
So how can the law be changed to prevent damage from being done? Or is there a way to do so?
Well, I mean, we've seen already a framework of that. I think, as I mentioned earlier, sort of our case study here is really with child pornography and how the federal government has been rightfully cracking down on that. I think all libertarians would pretty much agree, that, on that issue, and I think on
most
this issue
people
as well.
would. Yeah.
Most people, the vast majority, right? I mean, it's not to say that libertarians just have this on this moral high ground. Absolutely, everybody I think would agree with that. I would say we can then sort of transfer that over to this case and say, just like we've been regulating child pornography, we've been doing a good job, we've been really very much rigorously enforcing that, so too we can be doing that with cases like this, where even though somebody was filmed, that person may very well have regretted it. The filming is a form of exploitation, especially if it's being distributed without the person's consent. So I think we already have some kind of legal framework to work with. It's just a matter of just putting it and applying it to the case at hand, sort of revenge porn.
So in general, so this guy, he was kind of orchestrating this mass network of revenge porn. So it wasn't just him, it was all of these individuals. So then going further into the legal framework, if all of these individuals are submitting things on the site, can individuals be targeted as well, or should it just be this one guy who's kind of the kingpin of revenge porn?
I mean, I think that you can do both. You can say, well, you are, you can have two charges. So you can have one, for example, of posting video on the internet or something like that, and then you can have another charge in addition, which would be sort of this guy who was organizing in a large-scale fashion this distribution of revenge porn. And even if you don't have a separate charge, I think you could certainly insert a clause into the bill saying that there's now a higher minimum sentence for him or for any perpetrator for doing that, for really serving in that very active, heinous role.
So going forward, what do you think states or the federal government should do to kind of prevent this from being, it's already damaged so many people in so many ways, but how can we now transfer that into our government, because the law is just so behind on legislating these types of internet-based crimes?
Right. I would say number one is to really, going back to my first comment, to really think about it long and hard. I don't think it's an easy issue, and I think the Pandora's box sort of dilemma that can occur here is a serious one. So we have to really think about that and really think about how to narrowly tailor this legislation to attack just this and not to sort of be capacious enough to include other forms of speech that might, while not, let's say, injurious or harmful, are distasteful. So I think that's number one. Number two is, I think, to use the currently enforced and enacted legislation regarding child pornography as a model. because to my understanding it has been doing a pretty good job. Obviously we can do better, but as a law that has been enacted, it's done a pretty good job. And I think that if the states do decide to sort of crack down on this and to do so in a very narrowly tailored way, I think that's a good framework to use.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Emily Herman, and thank you for joining us on this episode of Politik Focus. See you next time.